Every scaling business's goal is to grow as quickly and as easily as possible with the least amount of friction. Because if we can avoid setbacks, why wouldn't we? But what most businesses don't understand is how to use their constraints or blind spots in order to grow their business faster. Sounds like an oxymoron, but it's not. And I'm going to show you how you can identify the right constraints in your business and then how you can actually take that to apply to a faster scaling strategy, increasing your profits, changing the world, and living your life. So let's get real. Now, welcome back to the Business Real Talk. And in this newest series, we're talking about businesses at scale. Last week, we tackled the power behind retention and the easy to implement strategies that can allow you to 4x your revenue and scale even faster using client retention. And this week, we're going to jump into and talk about the blind spots and constraints of businesses at scale. Now, there's nothing worse than pouring all of your time and energy into the growth and scalability of your business, only to find that your business is barely moving forward. And it's back to the drawing board into your next attempt to test, assess, and grow. But your business can't withstand solving the wrong problems again and again. It's like taking shots in the dark. And let's get real, taking advice from coaches or gurus that are only in it to sell you in their next best guess solution only leaves you pouring more money down the drain. Because when you can solve for the right constraints in your business, you're able to do things like increase profit margins by 20 to 30% without increasing input, making better use of your time and your team's time, allowing you to grow at scale, alleviating the need for expensive client acquisition costs that occur at scale, and allowing your business to see healthy and sustainable growth without you feeling like you're chasing the hungry growth monster that never seems to stop being hungry.
That's more like it.
Now, a few months ago, my daughter started to play lacrosse. She'd never played before, and neither had I, a girl from New Mexico who actually didn't even know what lacrosse was. So we bought all the gear, a stick, the goggles, all the things that she needed. And she went to practices twice a week for an hour and a half each practice. She was fully committed. And she was doing everything possible to learn the game and get better. And for an entire month, we did that on repeat. But the week before her first game, she started to practice in the backyard and asked me to start playing with her. Now, remember, I had never played before and I truly didn't even understand the game. So I threw her the ball in hopes that she could practice trying to catch it with her lacrosse stick. I threw it. She missed. I threw it again. She missed again. And that went on over and over and over again for a solid 20 minutes. At one point, she looked at me and said, "Mommy, I'm not that great at catching. I'm so sorry. I've been practicing, but I can't just seem to catch it. I just am not fast enough." So she kept trying to increase her speed because to catch the ball, she needed to be faster, or so she thought and what she'd been told. And every week she had worked at trying to get faster, but no matter what, she still couldn't catch the ball. I asked her to try doing it just one more time for me. And what I realized in that time was that it wasn't her speed that was causing her to not be able to catch it. It was quite the opposite. Her speed was actually making the problem worse. The problem was that the angle that she was holding her stick and the way she turned her shoulder was making it nearly impossible to catch the ball. Now, I asked her to try a different way, and she shrugged her shoulders, feeling totally defeated. Then that 20 minutes or so that we had been practicing, she hadn't caught the ball once. So she moved her shoulders and she positioned her hand on the stick, and I took a step back and got ready to throw the ball. I threw it. And she caught it. She looked at the net and then at me and she jumped up and down. So I threw it again and she caught it again. And for 20 minutes, we played and she caught nearly every single ball I threw. It didn't matter how high or how hard I threw it. She was able to catch it. But for an entire month, she had practiced, she had focused on her speed, and she tried to get as fast as possible because she believed that catching the ball came down to how fast she could be. But speed was never the problem. And let's get real. You've probably done something similar in your business. You've tried to fix one so-called defined problem only to realize that that wasn't even the problem all along. It's frustrating. And you spend weeks, months, years doing everything right, wondering why things aren't growing at the pace you want. Just like my daughter, who spent an entire month increasing her speed and only to realize that with one simple shift, she was able to catch the ball immediately. And you might feel like that, like you're doing everything you're supposed to. You're adding more people to your team and outsourcing so that you're not stuck in the day to day. You're increasing ad spend or your omnipresence strategy, thinking that your next level will be unlocked when you have more leads coming in. And you and your team's calendar is booked, but you're getting high no shows and no goes from so many prospective clients. But listen, I'm going to give you the most real and raw episode that's going to arm you with the clarity and direction on how to set your business up for scaling without all the headaches and missteps that so many businesses go through in the process. So I want you to bookmark this episode. You're going to want to revisit this every 6 months or so in your business growth strategy. Now, what I'm covering in this episode will undoubtedly make you more money. It will save you more time. And honestly, it will remove so many of the headaches, missteps, and blind spots that so many other people go through. And I guarantee you it's going to change the game in your business. Now, before we jump in, we need a little bit of real talk, okay? Most businesses struggle to diagnose their own constraints. I'm going to be totally real with you.
Well, you're right.
Myself included, okay? And it's not because you're not skilled enough. And it's not because you don't even know what to look for. It's because you're too close to your business and you can't objectively digest the data of constraints, okay? Now look at it this way. Before you tell yourself, why can't I figure this out? I want you to understand that corporations spend hundreds of thousands of dollars every year on bringing in consultants to help diagnose constraints in their business, even though they have a top-notch and fully integrated team that they have internally. I used to work for a huge corporation in marketing, and we would always spend tons of money on bringing in consultants who could help diagnose the constraints that we had in our business. And it wasn't because we weren't knowledgeable. It wasn't because we didn't know what to look for. It was simply because when you get too close to the business, it's really difficult to objectively see the opportunities. And the same goes if you're running your own business. I myself included used to struggle so much in trying to bring someone to come in on messaging or marketing or sales because I was embarrassed. I told myself, this is the thing I do so well for everyone else. Why can't I do it for myself? I call this proximity genius, okay? When you're too close to your own business and operations, it's impossible sometimes to diagnose the right problems. So why should your business be any different? We all experience some form of proximity genius where we're too close to our own genius, to our own business to be able to properly identify where our constraints are. I can't tell you how many people that are business mentors, marketing mentors, messaging mentors who come into my programs with their head held down thinking that they're doing something wrong because they need someone else's support. I want you to recognize here now, if you walk away with nothing else from this episode, I want you to hear that proximity genius is an absolutely real thing. And it's totally normal for your business to need and require the support of someone else to be able to help you diagnose those opportunities and constraints. Okay. I want you to be able to walk away from this episode at the very least, being able to at least start seeing what and where your constraints might be so that you can start to make those data-based strategic decisions at scale. Now, if you're listening to this and you're saying, Naz, I've tried it all. I've tried to figure this out on my own. I have gone to coaches and signed up for programs, and I can't seem to figure out what's actually not working or how to accelerate my growth. And I can't put my finger on exactly what's there. And I'm tired of just trying each thing. I want you to skip to the front of the line, okay? I want to be totally honest with you. There's a reason that our audits really are one of the most powerful things you're ever going to experience, because when my potential clients get on a call with me, even if we decide it's not a good fit or not the right time to work with me, they will at the very least walk away with a diagnosis of their constraints and their blind spots in their business, meaning that you can walk away clearly knowing what you should be working on your business so you're not spending so much time on the wrong things. And I will tell you this, 98% of people who I talk to are solving for the wrong constraint in their business. So let me just leave that with you here. But if you choose to book a call with me, what we will do is we'll look at your current client acquisition process. I'll diagnose for you right then on that call. I'll show you where that blind spot and constraint is, how you can solve for it, and how my easy yes method can work. So if you want to skip to the front of the line and you're tired of trying to figure this out on your own, go to easyesleads.com/call, book your call with me, and let's chat it through. Now, let's jump into it because I want to be totally clear with you. When it comes to growth and scaling, you need to understand and specifically understand leveraging constraints. Now, I need to be clear with you that I am of a totally different mindset when it comes to business growth. I'm a huge believer in running a very lean business model. So it's not the norm in the online business world where people are touting their 10-person team, their 250K months with 20% profit margins, and astronomical overhead in small to mid-sized businesses. That is not the normal. Okay. So I recognize that when I talk about 80 to 90% profit margins in my business and running a team of simply having one full-time team member on my business, I recognize that this is not the norm. Okay. It's not the norm of hitting 50 to 100K months in this style of business. But what I want you to recognize is that what I'm sharing with you here today is going to be very pertinent if you understand the power and leverage behind having a lean business model. To tell you that I have seen inside of businesses that are barely breaking even though they're regularly banking somewhere between $200 to $1 million months. Okay. I want to tell you that if you are weary of how you're going to be able to create and set your business up to scale, I want you to understand that everything I'm going to share with you over these next episodes is really going to be talking about the lean business model and the importance of that to truly being able to develop a scalable business. But that's a story for our next episode. And I promise you, I'm going to lay that foundation and break that all down for you in developing a lean business model on our next episode. But I do want you to understand that what I'm covering here today, talking about constraints and blind spots in business, really is a foundation in understanding a lean business model and creating that type of growth. So let's jump in. Let's talk about the 4 biggest constraints that we see in any growing and scaling business. Okay. So quickly, I'm going to go through them. They're leads, booked calls, conversions, retention. Okay. These are the 4 biggest constraints that a business, online business owner specifically, but any business really is going to struggle with. Okay. Now, I want to break this down in a little bit more detail because it's not just, hey, leads all together are the same thing and we're going to hash them into one little category. It's really the quantity and quality of leads. Okay. Number 2, we said booked calls, and it's the frequency and quality. Conversion is the ease and speed at which you create conversions, and then retention. Okay. Now, what I want you to understand is the source or cause of these constraints is where things really start to amp up. Because when we identify that the constraint is leads, for example, but further identify that it's not that we just need more leads. It's not that you have a lack of quantity of leads. It's the fact that you don't have the right quality of leads. We realize that we can't just slap some ads together and automate lead generation even more because that will only exacerbate the problem. And let me tell you, I have clients who have millions of followers, who have thousands, tens of thousands of people on their email list, and they are struggling to create conversions in their business. So I really want you to hear me and understand the fact that I know that up until this point, everything you've been taught here up until you've gotten to this podcast, and maybe this is your first podcast episode here at the Business Real Talk. And if so, thanks for being here with us. But if you've heard up until this point that you just need to show up, you just need more content, and you just need to grow your following, I'm going to literally rock your world and tell you that that's not necessarily true. Because if you're putting more of a message out that's only attracting the wrong type of leads, then I don't want you to put out more content and more messaging. If you are booking a ton of calls, but none of those calls are converting, I don't want you to book more calls. So I want to be clear that this is a difficult thing for it to land for you, to recognize the fact that up until this point, a lot of what you've been told maybe hasn't been what you needed to hear. But that's why you're here. That's why we're having this conversation. So let's talk about the common causes of the constraints that we mentioned. Okay. We're going to start with leads. Now, when it comes to the quality of leads, the number 1 biggest issue is messaging. That means your messaging is not speaking to either the right level of leads, which we talk about high intent leads. And we have a whole episode that talks about high intent leads and the difference between high intent and low intent leads. But the quality of leads is typically associated with the messaging that we are speaking to. So it's either that you're not speaking to the right level of clients, right? Not someone who's not ready to purchase. You're having to educate them. You're spending a ton of time on education and moving them to that next step. It's a messaging issue, right? and or you're not getting the right quality of leads because you're not articulating your message clearly, meaning maybe you have some great people and fundamentally they're all the right type, right? They've been qualified to be the right type of people. And I hate that word of qualifying people, but they're the right type of leads, but they're not buying from you. That's again still going to be the articulation of the value that you bring. So it's a little bit of messaging and a little bit of positioning. Okay. Now, the quantity of leads is visibility. And let me tell you guys, quantity of leads and creating visibility is the easiest problem to solve when it really is the problem. Because when you understand that it's visibility, it's really just a matter of amplifying the message you've already got. So it's a matter of like, okay, we have a message that works. We know that it creates the result we want. And now it's just amplifying that. So whether you do that through ads or organic, super simple process to do. But the problem that most people don't recognize is they go for the quantity of leads before they recognize the quality of leads. And so if you have a visibility strategy, again, whether that's ads or whether that's organic, and it's bringing in the wrong type of leads, it won't make a difference how much more money or resources we spend on that. And I see that so often with people who come to me and they're running tons of ads and they're like, I have a pipeline of leads. I have a lot of leads coming in, but they're not converting and they just keep pouring more visibility thinking that they need to get more leads, a higher quantity of leads, only to recognize that it doesn't matter if you get 1,000 more leads tomorrow, but those leads are bad leads and they're not the type of leads that you need, then we're fixing the wrong problem, okay? So good rule of thumb, for every 100 leads, I want you to ask yourself, how many of those leads convert to a booked call, okay? So how many from 100 leads, look at your last 100 leads, okay? And I want you to say how many of those 100 leads converted to a booked call, okay? Now, what I want you to think about is, let's say for every 100 leads, you're booking 2 calls, okay? And eventually that converts those 2 calls booked to 1 client, okay? Now, what I want you to understand is that we now can see you have a 2% conversion rate. So to book 10 clients a month, you're going to need 1,000 leads a month. I want you to ask yourself, can my business withstand that cost at scale? Doesn't matter if you're automating lead generation through ads or you're doing this organically like we do. You're going to need to know, can I maintain having to bring in 1,000 leads a month? That's a lot, right?
Totally agree.
So let's move into the next step. I want to talk about booked calls, okay? So booked calls, we talk about that frequency or quantity, right? We need to be able to know how we're bringing in those booked calls. And the biggest constraint behind our quantity or frequency of booked calls is that we haven't systemized your pre-selling. And I'll break this down a little bit more. I'm going to go through all of them first, and then I'll break them down. So systemizing your pre-selling, your call to actions, your positioning, and your marketing strategy. So just to recap, if your goal is to get more booked calls and the problem that you have, the constraint that you have is the frequency or the quantity of those, your issue, the lingering problem behind it, the root cause is that you haven't systemized your pre-sale, meaning that right now, reality is that you're probably having to handhold each person along the process, you or your team. That may be that you're responding to DMs or you're having to make sure that they get into your launches that you're running or ensuring that someone shows up to your webinars, things like that, right? You don't have a systematic approach to pre-selling so that when someone comes into your world, even while you're sleeping, they can move to a booked call. So quick and easy thing I want you to look at is right now, someone comes into your world, how can they be pre-sold into booking a call with you if you are not present? You or your team are not present. If there is not an easy way that is systematically producing a same result, then our problem is that we need to systemize your pre-selling activity, okay? So for my clients, we have our infinite sales highway, right? The bingeable authority and having our one-touch content system so that when someone comes into their world, they can immediately sell themselves throughout the process and book a call when they're asleep, right? 2 a.m., they can have a booked call. Now, the other option or the other constraint is call to actions. I see so many people who have a very weak call to action. They've either not positioned it correctly, meaning that they haven't really looked at the desire and the need and placed those 2 pieces together, or they haven't clearly articulated what's in it for them. And I have tons of episodes that talk about this as well, but call to action. And then like we talked about positioning. So positioning happens in a lot of places and a lot of people don't understand how powerful and important positioning is, but positioning can be all the way from how you're positioning what you do. So the articulation of what you do and connecting that. Think of positioning as a bridge between 2 things. That's the best way I always explain to people. It's how you create a bridge, whether that's between your potential clients' needs or their desires to what you offer, or positioning can be from you being able to speak to what you do and the gap in the market. So you're creating a bridge, but it's always a bridge. Okay. And then the marketing strategy, which is just another piece of the puzzle, very similar to the systemizing your pre-sale, just kind of a different way to say it. Now, quality, right? Where if we're not getting the right quality of booked calls, meaning that you're getting a lot of booked calls, the frequency of your booked calls is high, but the quality is low, meaning that there are people who are saying, oh, I'm not ready to purchase, or even they're not showing up to calls. That tells us that the quality of your calls are low. And the problem with this is that you have a messaging problem. Again, your pre-selling process and positioning. Now, what I want you to realize and what I want you to start looking at and identifying for yourself, because our goal is that you're going to be able to walk away from this. You could send me a DM, you could send me an email and say, Naz, here's my numbers. And we'd be able to say, okay, great. Now we have a starting point. So I want you to be able to ask yourself, how often are your leads turning into booked calls? So again, using that 100 example, because this works across any business. If I have 100 leads in my business, how many of them are turning into booked calls? Okay. How many calls are we booking in a week? And by what medium? What most people don't understand when it comes to booked calls is they don't have a repeatable process that produces the result over and over again. So what ends up happening is they maybe book a ton of calls during a launch period, but outside of that launch period, they don't have anything happening. They don't have an evergreen strategy in place, or maybe from launch to launch, it shifts a lot. And they're still feeling like, gosh, I never feel like I'm in a rhythm of booking a consistent number of calls. Because remember, consistency and repeatability is always going to play a bigger role than me saying, oh, 1 week I booked 10 calls and the next week I booked 0 calls, because that's not having consistency, and we can't scale an inconsistent business. Okay. So I want you to be able to recognize how many booked calls are you getting in a week? How many leads does it take you to book those calls? And by what medium are you consistently able to replicate that? Okay. Now let's move into conversions. Now, again, conversions are the point from a booked call. And I'm specifically using a booked call because I'm a huge, huge believer in booked calls. You could also talk about this from the standpoint of being on a DM, but I'm talking about it from a booked call strategy. So we want to talk about the ease, right? So how easy is it for you to convert? Now, notice that I'm saying ease. And the reason why is because some people can create really great conversions, but the ease strategy behind it and the baseline of it is that they're spending a really long time in DM conversations, or they're having 2-part closing processes, or their team is having to constantly follow up. And that means that our conversions aren't easy. And ease is really going to really relate to scalability and predictability in your business. So the common causes of a lack of ease is that, again, no pre-selling system. So I want to be clear, pre-selling and pre-qualifying are very different, right? Right now, you may have a pre-qualifying system in place. You may have a system that tells you the people that are coming into your world are qualified for what you're offering, but it's not selling them. Meaning that your selling is still predominantly dependent upon you and your team, which is not going to be easy to scale if it's requiring a lot of you and your team in order to do it. So pre-selling system, and if you've got questions about that, we have a whole episode on pre-selling system and how we built a 2-lane sales highway to do this. Messaging is another one, because again, if you are talking in circles on a conversion process, so let's say you're on a call and you're spending an entire hour just trying to get them to the point where they feel good. And I'm going to ruffle a lot of feathers and say the fact that I see a lot of people who have to coach on sales calls. And that is a huge major red flag to me that you have a messaging problem, because you're required to almost like give people a trial and have to like be able to get people to see that in action rather than being able to clearly message that. And it's not that I have any problem with people being able to give things away. It's that we want to be able to clearly articulate our messaging, because at scale, at some point, some pieces of those puzzles are going to get offloaded onto others, and you can't expect them to do the same thing that you did, because you currently are the mechanism that creates a conversion. Again, positioning, being able to bridge those pieces together, and then an actual sales call process. I'm really shocked that a lot of people don't have a sales call process. We have an entire 7-part sales call process. It sounds like, but it's really easy. And really the ultimate belief behind our sales call process is not selling. It's actually helping your prospective client sell themselves, even on the sales call itself, is that you want it to be as easy as possible so that they don't feel pressured and pushed into a decision, but they feel like it's a really simple and empowering way to move to the next process. So really having those pieces in place. Now, again, speed, meaning the speed at which you create a conversion. So if you have people right now who are sitting in your world and it's taking months, if not years, in order for us to convert them, then that's the speed problem, right? Some of the issues that come up as a result of that are lead targeting and your sales and marketing system. So again, if you are someone who leverages an open and closed cart and a launch system, something like that, where your offers aren't consistently open, then a reason why you have a slow conversion process can be because you're teaching your audience to only buy from you in cycles. So I know that we've been taught for a really long time that's a good thing, because guess what? If you have some sort of urgency, people will buy faster, but you're also teaching your audience that when you're not selling, they're not able to buy. And that's not a good thing, especially if you're working with high intent clients, which is who we really want to speak to, is people who want to make decisions, not the people who are like, let me see when I'm ready to make a decision. So again, the marketing and pre-selling systems are going to play a huge role in that, because a lot of people don't understand that you condition your audience. You teach your audience at what speed and what ease to convert into a client. Okay. So I want you to ask yourself these questions. How many of your booked calls turn into clients? So again, if you're booking 10 calls, but only 2 of those people are turning into clients, that means that in order to close 4 clients in a week, that you need to book 20 calls on you or your team's calendar. Is that sustainable at scale? Are you able to maintain that at scale? Now, there's things that go into that, right? And then retention. So, retention is one of my love languages, and we talked about this on our last episode. So I'm not going to go into as much detail because we already discussed this, but some of the things we're going to look at are your client renewal rate. So I need you to calculate the percentage of clients who renew their coaching or consulting or service engagements with you and continue to work with you after the initial contract or session. Again, I cannot tell you how many people have no clue what this looks like, and they're not looking at retention at all. They don't think this is an important aspect of business. If that's you, go back to my last episode, and you really need to pay attention to that. Now, next is that you want to monitor the attendance and completion of people coming through your programs, okay? It is not solely your job to get people into programs and not get them results. You have to be able to maintain a level of results. And so understanding people who are showing up to sessions and programs, and really being able to identify where the gaps in that constraint are as well. And another thing is to track the number of referrals. So a lot of people don't recognize referrals are a huge way to recognize whether or not you're creating retention in your business, because a client who has delivered a result, who is happy in what they've been able to achieve, is going to go and shout your name from the rooftop and share it with others. So I, for example, know that for every client I bring in, on average, we are able to turn one client into 3 or 4 clients. So every client I bring in, oftentimes on average, will amount to 3 to 4 additional clients. That's a number of referrals we receive because of the level of results and retention we create. And then lastly is to determine the average revenue or value generated by your customer throughout the entire relationship with your business. So again, this is the customer's lifetime value. Another huge piece of retention that I see the online business world just totally skips over. But you really want to be able to know when you bring in a client, even if initially they're spending $1,000, over time in their lifetime, what is the average revenue that you generate? Right? So I had a client who, when she came into my world, she had no retention strategy in place. And what was happening was every client that came in was just that $5,000 she was making when she first brought them in. So we implemented a retention strategy, and this will blow your mind. And our customer lifetime value went up to $15,000. That meant for every person that came in, she was able to retain and create that results and retention process into it, where she was then, that client was valued at $15,000 because they were either re-upping with her, retaining with her into another program, et cetera. So I think, again, a lot of people skip over this. They don't realize it. So the 3 biggest things that come into play when it comes to retention overall is programming. So what does your program actually look like? And I'm always shocked and amazed to see that so many coaches, consultants, service businesses, healers, et cetera, they don't have programming in place. And let me be very clear, and we'll create a whole other episode on this, whether you're working with clients one-on-one or in a one-to-many capacity, your ability to create programming and proactive programming is what I really believe in. And your ability to be able to know and be able to share how they get from point A to point B is huge, meaning that people don't want to come into your world and say, oh, just trust me, I'm going to get you to a result. They want to know that you have a very specific process in place, even if you customize that process based on when they come in to work with you. They need to know and have a programming process that allows them to get there. Otherwise, you're always going to be like reinventing the wheel every time. And that's reliant on you, and your business can't scale when it's reliant solely on you. So programming is a huge piece of that. Support is another huge piece of that. So how do you deliver support to your clients? And these are what I call result mechanisms, right? What is the support necessary in order to get your clients to those results? So many people don't look at the fact that when it comes to retention, there's a support aspect that isn't always just necessarily getting on a call, right? Do you need to build in accountability? Do you need to have ways that they can get further support? So like we have these things called results mechanisms in our business where we have things like business check-ins where people actually submit stuff to me and we go through it. We have things like inside the Facebook group and like what we actually have them create there and share with us. And like there's an entire process, even down to when we're getting on our calls inside of my programs, the way they submit questions and the way we're delivering that support so that even after the fact, we can come back and notice that, hey, a lot of people are having the same or similar constraint or problem. Here's how we can build in support to that and really obviously bring that back to programming as well. And then lastly is relationships. Are you developing relationships? I can't tell you how important relationships are, right? All the way through client acquisition, but also in the retention process. A lot of people get people into their programs and they sever that relationship once they're in there. And that is a huge part of retention. So now that we've talked about all the back end of constraints and understanding those blind spots and how they work, I just want to end on really sharing with you guys the optimization of those constraints. Now, what I want you to recognize is that constraints are always shifting. So what I want you to do is get into the habit of realizing that you're pretty much going to be optimizing one constraint at any given time for as long as you run your business. And that's not a negative thing, okay? It's not because you never get things to work. It's more that you're always going to have new opportunities for growth should you choose it. Now, let's say you get to a certain point where you're like, Naz, I'm good. I'm happy with the number of clients I'm bringing in. I don't need to bring in any more clients. I'm happy with the level that we're at. Then things can slow down, right? But we're talking about if you're ever going to want to increase growth, then you're going to constantly see that your constraints need to make shifts. So let me put it to you this way. Even in those times where you're like, I'm happy with where I'm at, if you're acquiring clients at scale and everything is going well, retention is always going to be a point of optimization, because imagine that you have 4 cups sitting in front of you and you're pouring into each of those cups, but your retention cup can never really overfill. You can always further support your clients. And I'm a huge believer in recognizing that that is your biggest asset in your business, is how you can consistently up level how you support your clients. Okay. Now, one of the biggest mistakes I see people make when it comes to scaling businesses, and I've done this for over 400 plus businesses, all the way from brand newbies to corporations, is that they try to fix more than one constraint at a time, okay? Now, I have clients who come to me and they're tired, they're frustrated. I had a client who she was really frustrated and ready to throw in the towel, okay? She had a 7-figure business and she was trying to stay on top of everything, ensuring that her ads filled her pipeline with leads, ensuring that her marketing was working to move people to calls, staying on top of her team about converting calls, and trying to keep up with client deliverables and results. It was a nonstop process for her. She was exhausted.
I am too tired.
Now, the problem that we saw was that rather than trying to focus and understand one specific constraint and solve for that constraint, she was trying to fix everything at one time. Now, the problem with this is it causes really 3 foundational problems. One is that we don't have the right resource allocation, okay? Because constraints often require dedicated resources, whether that's time, finances, personnel. When we tackle just one constraint at a time, our business can allocate its resources more efficiently, ensuring that you're concentrating on resolving the identified constraint effectively, rather than putting some time and energy and then jumping to the next thing and then jumping to the next thing and not fully identifying that. Okay. Next is prioritization. Not all constraints have an equal impact on business performance. Sometimes we're solving the wrong problem. I see it so often that people come in and they say, I just need a social media manager. I just need a content creator, or I just need an ads manager. And they think that those are the constraints that are going to have the biggest impact on their business performance. But as we all know, they haven't addressed the right one. But what happens is when we can address just one constraint at a time, the business can now prioritize based on the impact that it's going to have on, and the urgency that each of those are going to have on your business. This approach ensures that the most critical constraints are tackled first, leading to quicker and more impactful improvements. And then the third is that you're going to have better measurements and evaluation. If you can't measure things because everything's sloppy and messy, when it comes to really being able to address that, we want to be able to know and identify one constraint at a time, because then we can more easily measure and evaluate the effectiveness of the solutions that we're implementing into our business, because we can isolate a single constraint and it's easier to track those changes and determine whether the chosen solution is successful. Because if we're changing 4 things at a time, but we don't know what's actually producing the result and what's not, then we're going to constantly be solving more problems. Okay. So I want you to think about creating a constraint plan. At this point in your business, I want you to be able to look at things and say, how can I develop a constraint plan? Can I identify the obstacles, the blind spots, the constraints in my business?
Here's my question.
If the answer is no, book a call, easyesleads.com/call. Don't hesitate. Move to that next step in your business without spending all your time on the wrong things. Because think of it this way, the next step in this process is I want you to recognize that adding a powerful new software into your business. And the best way I explain this is I used to have this old Mac computer, and every time I would add a new software like Photoshop or InDesign when I was back in my marketing days, what would happen was I would add these really powerful new softwares and I'd be so excited because I had this new opportunity. And then my entire laptop would crash because I hadn't upgraded the operating system. I see this a lot with businesses too, is that they add these powerful new pieces into their business and they fix constraints, but we don't look at how it really relates to holistically and integrates into our entire strategy. So again, when you apply a new upgrade into, for example, your call process, and you have fancy new pre-qualifying questions and reminders that are ensuring that people show up to calls, you need to ensure that that integrates into, for example, your marketing process. Are there shifts that you need to make from the links that you send to people or the emails that went out talking about the calls? What needs to change in order for that to integrate into your holistic client acquisition process? Which again leads us to the fact that really when we talk about scalability and identifying constraints, a huge part of what I do as a strategist that is not often used within the coaching industry and mentorship in general is that most people don't know where their constraints are. So they're solving for all these wrong problems, feeling like they're spending so much of their time and energy and resources on things that aren't actually producing the results they want. What if instead we could fast track it? What if I could tell you that most of my clients reached their 5-year goal in 6 months because we stopped fixing the wrong constraints? My talent, my ability, what I'm capable of doing is that I come in as a strategist and consultant and look at businesses holistically to identify where their real constraints are, prioritizing those constraints, and then developing the strategies and the plans that allow us to solve for them. It doesn't matter if your goal right now is that you just want to get to a point where you're booking 5 calls, or if you want to hit your first $1 million month. Those still are rooted in understanding the constraints that we have that are going to allow us to accomplish that with the least amount of friction, resources, and time necessary in order to achieve that. This is why my EasyS method is so powerful, because I truly do look at client acquisition and retention holistically. I look at your business as a whole cycle process. We look at things like what your methodology looks like. Do you have IP and methodology that creates the messaging and positioning? Because that's the take that we have on things. You can create messaging and positioning, but you're always going to be trying to upgrade it every time something new comes into the market. If you do not have the intellectual property and the proprietary and innovative methodology that clearly delineates your specific and innovative process. So that's the first point of contention for all of my clients. The first thing we work on, it doesn't matter if you are brand new or you've been in business for 18 years, which I have a lot of clients who come in that way. We're going to identify how to develop your methodology and how to then clearly articulate it with the messaging and positioning that speaks to high intent leads so that you can quickly and easily move them to a conversion, which leads us to the next step. Our proprietary infinite sales highway system is literally the only of its kind that specifically targets and converts your high intent leads, but also has a second lane that allows you to create infinite sales because you're able to support your mid intent leads, the people who aren't quite ready to make that purchase. We're able to consistently create that conversion because we have a 2-lane sales highway so that you're able to get clients who sell themselves while you sleep because you're automating the conversions in your business rather than simply trying to automate more leads into your business, which leads us to the third and final piece of the puzzle, which is results and retention, where we actively look at your business from a standpoint of how can we create proactive programming that allows your clients to get consistent, amazing results without needing so much hand-holding from you and where you anticipate their specific needs, but also how can we leverage retention within your business without needing to necessarily create a whole bunch of new things so that you can have a thriving, scalable business without needing complicated or overwhelming or friction within the process. So again, if you want to learn a little bit more about our EasyS method and exactly how it works, go to easysleads.com and check out our free on-demand mini series that breaks this all down. But if you're listening to this and you're saying to yourself, I'm tired of trying to figure out what's happening, and I really want to be able to develop the business, the strategy, the systems that allow me to develop my business to scale, and you want to see why I've worked with over 400 clients who have said that I have been the best investment they've ever made in their business and their life, then I want to invite you to book a call with me. Again, on this call, we're going to look at your entire business process. I'm going to help you identify where your biggest constraints are and how the EasyS method can work for you and your business. Head over to easysleads.com/call and book your call. But until next time, where I'll be breaking down the lean business model that is unheard of in this industry and how we're able to have profit margins of 80 to 90% in our business and helping our clients do the same without needing to overextend yourself, then make sure that you subscribe, you leave us a message, and you share with a friend because you're not going to want to miss next week's episode. And as always, I love to hear from you. So jump over to Instagram at Next Level Up CEO, TikTok at Next Level Up CEO, or Facebook at Next Level Up CEO, and send me a message. Tell me your numbers. Tell me what you came up with here, because I would love to hear from you and talk a little bit more about the constraints in your business. So thank you for being here, and thanks for keeping it real.